Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Santa Fe Mountains Landscape Resiliency Project informational webinar. I just want to point out that, thank you, we are recording, as everybody knows. I want to welcome you all to the Santa Fe Mountains Landscape Resiliency Project informational webinar. My name is Lucy Moore. I will be facilitating the session tonight. I'm a facilitator and a mediator based in Santa Fe, a private contractor under contract to the Santa Fe National Forest to do this particular facilitation tonight and another meeting next week that I'll be telling you about. I'm very grateful to be part of this. I've worked over the years nationally, regionally, and especially like to work close at home, have worked with the forest many times in the past, and I'm honored to be part of this event. So the purpose of our meeting tonight is to learn about the project and hear an overview of the draft environmental assessment. That EA was sent out, I think, about 3 weeks ago. The comment period is open now, and we'll talk more about submitting formal comments a bit later. Our agenda for the evening is simple. We have two introductory presentations from Steve Romero, District Ranger for the Pecos, Las Vegas District, and the new District Ranger for the Espanola District, Sandy Jaquez, and really happy to have you here, Sandy. Welcome. Following those two presentations, several Forest Service staff specialists will be offering the key findings that are in the EA. They'll be able to answer a lot of questions, not all, obviously. So we're not expecting them to be able to answer every question. And all the questions then we will take following the presentations. We hope to have 30 to 40 minutes at the end of our meeting for questions. So I think that is it from me. I look forward to helping move this along. I'll kind of be monitoring and asking the questions as they come up. So thank you all for being here. I look forward to a really good, informative, and heartfelt evening together. Thank you all so much. So I'm going to turn it over now to Steve, and Steve and Sandy will make their presentations.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Steve Romero, the District Ranger on the Pecos, Las Vegas Ranger District. I'd like to just take a quick second to thank everyone who are on tonight attending this meeting. And please note that the public involvement is really important to the forest, and it's a really critical part of the NEPA process. And the whole purpose for tonight's presentation is to provide some background on the project, including things like the purpose and need, project objectives, proposed activities, actions that we plan on doing on the ground, and then to share some of those findings from the environmental assessment that you'll hear from our specialists. And then through your comments, you can help us to either support or question some of these findings. That'll be very helpful. So to start, I want to share some background information and give you an idea of the overall project timeline. The project has been in the works for a long time now, with development going back to about 2017. And the project was developed in collaboration with many partners at the Greater Santa Fe Fireshed Coalition. And then in 2019, the project went out for public scoping, and we received extensive comments at that time, and thousands of comments actually. And so those scoping comments informed our final proposed action, and then helped us direct the analysis that we've been conducting for the last 2 years now. So now we've released the draft EA to the public here at the end of September, and then we are currently in the middle of the comment period. So once the comment period ends in late October, then we'll review and respond to the comments received and work towards releasing a final EA and draft decision in around January of next year, with a final expected hopefully in March. And of course, that's if it heads in that direction from an EA, environmental assessment standpoint. Now, once we have that signed, we want to implement as soon as possible, because every year we don't treat, we leave our values are at risk. So what are these values? Next slide, please. Why are we concerned about forests in the project area, and why is the project important? Well, it's the mountains, you know, that they're magical, they provide, they are why we are proud to call Santa Fe home, but the mountains are at risk, and the resources that they provide are also at risk. Dry conifer forests in the project area, like ponderosa pine and mixed conifer, they're fire adapted forests, meaning that historically they've experienced regular low to mixed intensity fires. And we know this from fire range studies that have taken place in the project area, that the fires used to take place every 10 to 15 years. But due to over 130 years of fire exclusion, these forests have become out of balance, and large amounts of fuel have built up, putting many of our values at risk. So there is a need to reintroduce fire as an ecological process to improve our environmental conditions and environmental function. So many values are at risk, again, due to the increasingly high probability of large, high severity fire, and then due to the declining forest conditions as a result of fire suppression. That's kind of what we're finding. So if you look at this slide, there's some values that we've listed, but others include acequias, trails, highways, roads. We've also learned in the last year that we have more Mexican spotted owl habitat than our first projection during our scoping period. So we know that's another very important value at risk. State Highway 475, Artist Road, that's the highway to the Santa Fe ski area from Bishop's Lodge Road. It's named Artist Road for a reason. Its magical scenic value is captured by artists from around the world. I grew up here. I'm from the Tesuque area, the Tesuque village. These mountains are what makes Santa Fe in the area, Santa Fe. Next slide, please. Now, to further illustrate how our forests are out of balance, the graph on the right is showing several stages in mixed conifer frequent fire forests. We use serial stages to describe smaller units of vegetation condition and succession. So when we compare the current, that's the bar on the left, with the desired conditions, we can see that our forests are currently dominated by closed forests. And by closed, we mean that these forests have a closed tree canopy, which can present increased risk for crown fires. And to support the foraging needs of species like the Mexican spotted owl, what we need is more late open forests, which then are represented by the pink bar you can see in the desired condition column to the right. In these closed forests, fuel loads are also naturally high, and forests, they're uncharacteristic in terms of fire intolerant species that provide ladder fuels for surface fire to move up into the canopies. And then by moving towards having more late open forests, it's going to help us to reduce the risk of high severity fire. And that's by reducing, again, these fuel loads and these ladder fuels. Next slide, please. Now, these are our project objectives, and we know that fire is nature's haircut tool, if you will. It keeps nature's hair, the trees, clean and healthy, not chaotic and overgrown. So restoring fire to its historic role and reducing fuel loads will reduce risk of high severity fire. But again, it's not just a risk reduction project. The project is really to help us. It's designed to restore balance and again, ecosystem function. Restoring condition, forest condition, and environmental function will help to improve habitat for priority species like the spotted owl, the Mexican spotted owl. And by the way, it is a threatened endangered species, and it's going to help us improve watershed and riparian. Next slide, please. The project is located largely within the greater Santa Fe Fireshed, and that fireshed landscape is about 107,000 acres, and it's along the Santa Fe Mountains and in the southern part of the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. The total project area is about 50,000 acres, okay? And it's split between a northern area and a southern area. You can see the polygon delineated by the black lines. Generally, that's the Rio Medio Tesuque area. And then to the south, again, a different polygon delineated by the black lines is generally the Cañada de los Alamos and the Glorieta area. The municipal watershed for Santa Fe is between the two polygons. So the two treatment areas, and just to give you a little orientation. Now, please note that we are not going to treat the entire project area, the 50,000 acres, but we'll be using a what we call a condition-based approach to determine where to treat and what treatments are going to be most appropriate relative to these specific sites. With that being said, I'm going to pass it on now to Sandy Hawkins, who is the district ranger of the Espanola Ranger District, to conclude this part of the presentation. Sandy?
Good evening, everybody. Hopefully you all can see me and hear me. My name is Sandy Hawkins, and I am officially, as of last week, the new district ranger here in Espanola. So to continue on with what Steve was discussing, the project includes 4 restoration activities. And these activities include small diameter vegetation thinning, prescribed fire, riparian restoration, and even road closure. And we are going to use a condition-based approach, meaning that the current conditions will tell us where and what to treat as we move across the treatment areas. So what this means is where stands are more open, we will be able to burn without thinning first. And where stands are more closed, we will need to thin small diameter vegetation to be able to safely reintroduce fire back into the landscape. So the acreage limits that you see are the upper limits of the treatments that could be implemented over a 10 to 15 year period. So 18,000 acres that are thinned are also included within that 38,000 acres of burning. And also included in that acreage is riparian restoration, where we're looking at a total of 38,680 acres of treatment across that 50,000 acre project. Next slide, please. So some of the key findings, you're going to see a lot of information in the environmental assessment. And some of the specialists tonight will be providing a summary of some of those findings very shortly. Since we aren't able to have all the specialists present tonight, we'll briefly summarize some of the findings by resource areas that will not have detailed presentations today. I also encourage you to review the draft EA for a more thorough presentation of the findings. So the assessment evaluates the impacts of treatments on heritage and tribal resources and concludes that by reducing the risk for high severity wildfire, the project would help protect heritage and tribal resources. Treatments would be developed in consultation with tribes and traditional rural communities to avoid any advertent damage or heritage to those tribal resources. So with regards to range, the project area overlaps 3 grazing allotments, and proposed treatments would also benefit the range condition of these allotments in the long term, with an increase in forage production, quality, and an improved distribution of the livestock. For any areas experiencing a moderate to high severity burn, monitoring would be used to ensure vegetation and soils have recovered sufficiently before grazing is continued to avoid any cumulative adverse impacts from both the treatments and grazing. The project area also includes 8 inventory robust areas, also referred to as IRAs, and these comprise approximately 24,600 acres. The project is not planning to build any new roads, So there would be no change to the road list characteristics of the IRAs. There are multiple values and features of IRAs, and we discuss how some of these are adversely impacted in the short term with treatments, but we conclude that these impacts are generally outweighed by the long-term benefits of reducing the risk of high severity wildfire. For all the other resource areas, project design, best management practices, and mitigation measures will keep the impacts of the project level low. Next slide, please. Oops, I think I switched my slides up. Sorry, guys. All right. So why didn't the Forest Service do an EIS? This is a question we have gotten continuously and quite a bit throughout our process. So let's revisit briefly now that we have the full EA in hand. So we did an EA because we weren't sure if the project would significantly impact the environment or not. We are treating a large area, but due to the nature of these treatments, which is mostly reintroducing fire into frequent fire forests, we didn't really expect to see a significant impact. So per our NEPA process, if the EA were to have demonstrated the potential for a significant impact, then we would go back to the drawing board and in turn prepare an EIS. But we did a full environmental assessment, and so far we have not seen any evidence of a significant impact. Next slide, please. So how can the public learn more and provide more comments? So now that the assessment is complete, we invite the public to review the assessment and see if you agree with our conclusions. The draft EA has been posted on the Forest webpage, and the full assessment was released back on September 13th. We gave the public an additional 13 business days, which is more than a full 2 weeks, to review and digest the environmental assessment prior to the official start of the 30-day comment period. We allowed for this additional advanced review in response to some of the comments we received during scoping. So this is our first meeting that's going to occur during the 30-day comment period. We will continue tonight with some presentations followed by some Q&A. And then next week, we invite you to another meeting, which is going to be more of an open house. And in that meeting, you'll have a little bit more of an opportunity to have some one-on-one discussions with the specialists regarding the draft environmental assessment. So we also invite you to provide official comments online via the webpage. And there is a link on there that will take you directly to where you can submit your comments for the project. You may also provide comments either by mail or hand delivery to myself, Sandra MLRP at the Espanola Ranger District, and we will gladly review those comments as well. So again, the full instructions are available on how to comment on the project webpage, but I ask that you also keep in mind that your comments are not votes on the project. We encourage you to be as specific and substantive as possible with your feedback and make sure it's relevant to the proposed project and the environmental assessment. So thank you for your interest and your involvement in the process, and I will hand it back over to Lucy.
Great, thank you, Sandra, so much. And that's quite a beginning for considering you just took on this post. So job well done. And I noticed you're balancing family in the background, and I'm sure you're not the only one dealing with that. We've all got other lives going on, so very much appreciate that, Sandy. We're now going to move on to hearing from the specialists on the different subject areas covered in the EA. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves as their turns come up. I believe I'm not in charge of the slide deck here, but I think is vegetation coming up first. Let me see if I'm lucky enough to have that appear. Yes, great. Gennaro, would you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the topic?
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for your attendance. And I just have a few quick slides so we can leave room for questions and conversation. That's the important thing here. So this next two slides are just going to cover the vegetation communities section of the EA, which is the draft EA, that is section 3.2. And we can just go to the next slide, please, Alberta. So these were the questions that were addressed in the vegetation analysis, and I'll just go through them and talk about what the outcome was. So we addressed how would the proposed treatments address silvicultural concerns? How would the proposed treatments address forest health? How would the proposed treatments affect upland vegetation? How would the proposed treatments affect old growth? And how would the site-specific amendments to the forest plan affect northern spotted owl and northern goshawk habitat? And I encourage everyone to take a look at the EA and give it a good read. Next slide. So under just a summary of the analysis, under the proposed alternative, up to 18,000 acres would be treated by thinning and or mastication, and up to 38,000 acres would be treated by prescribed fire. Modeling of the proposed action showed long-term improvements relative to the no action alternative in all of the categories considered. And that included basal area, which is a measure of stand density, relative stand density, canopy cover, which hopefully is kind of self-explanatory, just a measure of the overstory canopy, total flame length, looking at what would happen under prescribed fire scenarios, crowning index and torching index, which are both indices that relate to the potential of forests and trees to succumb to torching and or crowning under a fire event, and canopy base height, which is a measure of the distance from the ground to the base of the dominant overstory tree canopy. The models using the analysis also indicate the proposed treatments would successfully shift the current ratios of seral state development. And those seral states are divided into a few categories, ranging from early succession, early seral, which is a grass forb shrub, to early open and early closed conditions, and then to late more developed stand characteristics such as late open and late closed. In the three target ecological, the ERUs, the ecological response unit, I believe is, I'm drawing a blank here. Yeah, ecological response unit towards the desired future conditions. And those are all outlined in the EA. So I just encourage everyone to read through the analysis. And if you have questions, we can try to answer them here. But again, the important thing is to submit them formally so we can provide detailed written response. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Gennaro, very much. So I believe if we go to the next slide, it will be fire and fuels. Terrific. And I know we have Ryan here and Dennis. I think, are you two going to kind of tag team this one? And please introduce yourselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucy. My name is Ryan Ream. I'm the prescribed fire fuels technician on the east side of the Santa Fe National Forest. And I'm going to talk to you today about the fire and fuel section of the EA and the findings. Jumping right into it, I'm going to be discussing the findings and not the methodology. You can read about that in the EA for time's sake. Most of the areas within the fire regime group 1 and 3, which is low and mixed severity, frequent fire ecosystems. Most of the area has not burned in over 100 years. And from a local fire history study that we reference in the EA, and you can read about that, that's 10 times the maximum fire return interval in the area. And as a result, we have a significant buildup of fuel. Currently, we're looking at approximately 18 to 33 tons per acre. And under the no action alternative, that will continue to increase. As a result of that fuel loading, we have a pretty significant risk of high severity fire. Our modeling showed that under the current conditions, 60% of the area would experience flame lengths over 4 feet. And looking at your map here and explain it a little bit, the red that you're looking at is flame lengths over 25 feet. The yellow and orange areas are flame lengths 4 feet to 25 feet, and the green is flame lengths 4 feet and under. So you can see we're at a pretty high risk of intense wildfire, and flame lengths over 4 feet are too intense for ground resources to get in there and suppress a fire, which means that you'd have to utilize dozers or aerial retardant to suppress a fire under 90th percentile burning conditions at which this was modeled. So also the findings found that crown fire activity is possible over 74% of the area, either passive or active crown fires, meaning the fires are burning in the crowns. And we experienced that in the project area last year on the Mayville fire. That's the northern part of the map there above that hole. And we experienced pretty significant crown fire activity coming out of the Rio and Medio drainage. Next slide, please. So now moving on to the proposed action. We're looking at reducing the fuels in the ponderosa pine to approximately 3 tons per acre. That's about 110 less than the desired conditions. And in the mixed con, we're looking at reducing the fuels to approximately 16 tons per acre, which is 3 tons more than the desired condition. And that's 3 to 16 tons per acre versus the 18 to 33 tons per acre of the current conditions. So pretty significant reduction. Analyzing the treatments, we modeled for 2 to 5 years post-treatment and 6 to 10 years post-treatment. And we utilized 3 different treatment scenarios. The first being low severity prescribed fire only versus the second, which is light thinning, followed by pile burning of the slash, followed by another entry of broadcast low severity broadcast burning. And then the third scenario being heavy thinning, pile burning of the slash and broadcast burning. And you can see here in these slides right here that I have up that versus the last slide that you saw, all of the treatment scenarios had a reduction in wildfire behavior and integrated hazard in the short term. After 2 to 5 years, the prescribed fire out of all the treatments had the greatest increase in wildfire behavior and integrated hazard. The light thinning decreased the wildfire hazard over 2 to 5 years and 6 to 10 years more than the prescribed burn only. And then the heavy thinning and prescribed burning had the greatest reduction in wildfire behavior and integrated fire hazard. Next slide, please. This slide shows the integrated fire hazard. That's a combination of the potential to burn as well as the wildfire behavior. And you can see reduction. The first slide is the prescribed burning only. We have the existing condition, then we have prescribed burning only in the middle, and then on the right we have light thinning and prescribed fire. And this is, both of those are after 2 to 5 years. So you can see visually the reduction in integrated fire hazard. Lastly, one other thing I want to talk about is not only does reducing the flame lengths to less than 4 feet make it more safer and effective for firefighters to get in and suppress a fire, it also reduces the fire ember production. Ground fires don't produce as much embers, and they don't loft them as high in the atmosphere as a crown fire. Studies have found that homes are more at risk of being damaged by wildfire from ember wash than they are from direct flame contact or radiant heat. So this has the potential to make homes within the WUI area safer in a wildfire scenario. And that's all that I have. Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate it. Next up, I believe we have Josh Hall. If we can see Josh's slides. Right, air quality and climate. Thanks, Josh, and please introduce yourself.
Sure. Can you hear me and see me?
Loud and clear.
Great. Okay. So I'm the Natural Resource Staff Officer on the Santa Fe National Forest, and I'd like to just talk about what's in the EA regarding air quality and climate change and some of the conclusions on the proposed action. So next slide, please. So this text was pulled directly out of the EA, just talking about the current condition of air quality, and generally, as folks in Santa Fe know, air quality in the Santa Fe area are generally very good, and you know, much of that is due to regulations that have been in place and reducing a lot of the pollution that much of the country has been affected by, but that's expected to decrease. The part that is the biggest concern is the second bullet here, impacts to visibility and ambient air quality associated with particulate matter, generally fine particulate matter. The smaller the particle, PM 2.5 is what we refer to. It is the greatest concern to human health because that can people inhale it and it goes directly into the bloodstream, and there's a lot of research in terms of the impacts on human health that is associated with that. Generally, what we're seeing is this is increasing across the West. Santa Fe is not unique. Fortunately, we have been spared some of the very significant impacts that other parts of the U.S. have had in terms of this, even though there have clearly been impacts from wildfire on the community. And the other concern broadly in general is with climate change, increases in fugitive dust is, more vegetation. And I think we've seen that generally with more dust storms and that. So next slide, please. Okay, so what's the current condition with climate change here? And generally what we're anticipating is to have large lasting impacts to a variety of ecological, social, and economic resources in and around the Santa Fe National Forest. We've already seen increases of temperature over the last several decades, as well as increased nighttime temperatures, and we're expecting that to increase over the next century. In terms of what that is having an effect on in terms of precipitation, we're seeing already less snow in low to mid elevations. This is generally falling more as rain, and more variability in terms of precipitation. So I think several years ago, I remember, here we are in the driest winter we've ever experienced in recorded history. That was preceded earlier that year by a 1,000-year storm event that occurred in Santa Fe. So that's what we're talking about, really greater extremes in terms of precipitation and temperature. So next slide, please. We are seeing at higher elevations, snowfall and spring snow stay fairly stable, and a lot of the models are suggesting this to continue. What we are seeing, though, is increased spring runoff, which is affecting kind of hydrograph and hydrology. So more precipitation is occurring earlier, more runoff is occurring earlier in the year than it would in the past, with reduced base flows longer in the year. Changes in temperature, timing of precipitation, again, this idea of earlier peak stream flow rates in streams, higher spring flows, and lower summer flows. So next slide, please. For folks that like to see graphics and see that differently, the top graphic here shows precipitation in the Santa Fe County historic and the forecasted temperature. So the gray on the earlier part is the last century of precipitation. And then as we go further out into the next century, that's the forecast based on various climate models. And what you can generally see is the forecast expects precipitation to stay fairly steady in our area. But again, we're expecting more rain in mid to low elevations and earlier runoff. The next two slides show the maximum temperature and the minimum temperature over time. And we're already seeing an increase in both of those. And models are showing significant increases over the next century in terms of both, which will have significant impacts potentially on vegetation as well as water. So just a different way of looking at it, but this is what the models are showing. Next slide. So one of the patterns of vulnerability of climate change on the Santa Fe and surrounding lines, the project area here is in this northeast zone and southeast zone on this map. And generally what we see is a lot of moderate vulnerability in the project area in terms of resiliency and resistance to the effects of climate change. This is primary, what you see, that yellow is a lot of the ponderosa pine and dry mixed conifer that are in the area where we're concerned in terms of their ability without treatment to be able to withstand and be resilient to the impacts of climate change. Next slide. So moving back over to air quality, I know there's a significant concern about air quality related to prescribed fires in Santa Fe and the surrounding communities. And one of the things that bounds our decision in terms of mitigation are that anything that the forest does must comply with federal and state law. And there are laws on the books in terms of protecting visibility and air quality that the forest always has to meet in terms of how they design and implement their prescribed burn. So some of those things in terms of operations, what does that mean is we do not start prescribed fires unless the atmospheric conditions are going to transport smoke away from town. And, in terms of limiting those impacts to the communities and keeping it below air quality standards. And so we work closely with the state in terms of when burns do occur to make sure that those conditions are in place when we do burn to keep those impacts as minimal as possible. Next slide. Kind of in conclusion, what the EA, the analysis for air quality and climate change and carbon storage showed is compared to the emissions of a wildfire, the proposed action would lead to less smoke emissions overall, reducing the risk to public health and visibility in comparison. And in terms of climate change and carbon storage compared to the no action, we don't see significant effects when we're looking at forest-wide carbon stocks, but we would increase the resiliency and sustainability of carbon sequestration to future disturbances such as drought, insect and disease, wildfires, and the effects of climate change. That's the conclusion of the EA for this section. So next for air quality, greenhouse gas, and carbon storage. So next, that's all I had. Thanks, Lucy.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Thanks so much. So next up is Danny Burton with Wildlife. And I think we're going to, hopefully we'll be done with presentations in about 15 minutes and we can open it up to questions. So Danny, thanks.
Thank you. So I am Danny Burton. I am the Pecos, Las Vegas Ranger District biologist and the biologist for this project. I have worked with a good team of biologists who have assisted me with this, the report writing and the analysis. And those folks are acknowledged in the reports if you guys are interested in seeing that. So I appreciate their help on all this. So what I'm going to cover today is the biology section, which covers wildlife, fish and aquatics, and plants. That's broken up into two sections that you'll find in the draft EA, the threatened and endangered species section 3.4 and 3.5, the flora and fauna. Next slide, please. So that first section, 3.4, threatened and endangered species, that information comes from the biological assessment, where we look at, again, threatened and endangered species. We only have one threatened and endangered species in this project area, and that's the Mexican spotted owl. You see a photo of it there to the right. We know that this species is present. We have conducted surveys for them and have found them in the project area, and of course from other past observations as well. With that, there's various habitats that occur for this species in the project area, including designated critical habitat, protected activity centers, nest roost habitat, foraging, etc. So all those would be managed per the spotted owl's recovery plan. So as we were looking for those habitats, we did a modeling effort that brought in a lot of folks, including Fish and Wildlife Service, our regional office. And the models found the nest roost habitat in the project area. So we could set those aside and make sure that we're managing 4 nest roost habitat for this species, again, per the recovery plan. As such, with all these types of habitats that occur in the area, we developed and modified the proposed action to make sure that we're meeting the desired conditions for spotted owls. Again, their abbreviation is MSO. You'll see that here in the slides for the, per the recovery plan. So then we went through the analysis, which is described in the biological assessment, looked at the effects of the proposed actions, the potential effects to the spotted owl. As such, the conclusion we came to was that there's going to be some short-term negative impacts and also some short-term beneficial impacts, and along with long-term beneficial effects. So with all those considered and combined, the determination is that this project may affect, but is not likely to adversely affect this species or their habitat. With that, what's going to happen, one of our next steps is we'll go to consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service. Starting out during this comment period, we'll have some discussions and then consultation after that. So they'll have an opportunity to chime in and look at our analysis and assessment. Next slide, please. So the rest of the species that we considered are included in 3.5, the flora and fauna, and it's all this list of species here that you can find out about in the biological evaluation. Next slide. So the first group of species we looked at are sensitive species. There's quite a few of them, about 35 species that we looked at, ranging from wildlife, terrestrial species to aquatic species and plants. There's basically the 2 determinations that came out for those. One would be some species received a no impact determination, and largely because they're just not known in the area or don't have habitat. An example would be like the Canada lynx. Then other species received a may impact determination because they may occur in the area, may have habitat in the area, and there may be impacts both negative and or beneficial. Some of those examples are marten, bats, and some various plants. One specific is the goshawk. It's a sensitive species. You can see to the right. It is also known in the area following surveys. So as such, we are implementing recommendations from the GTR 310, which provides specific recommendations for goshawks. With that considered, there could be the determination for this species specifically is a may impact, because there may be some short-term negative impacts, such as disturbance if they're in the area, but long-term benefits, increases to forage and available habitat. Next slide, please. The next group of species are management indicator species. The 4 that had habitat in this area are mourning dove, pinyon jay, which you can see to the right, hairy woodpecker, and turkey, which that's a track of to the right. This analysis was largely based on looking at their habitat type and their overall population. And so looking at the proposed actions and what could, what may change, it was determined that we're not really going to have a measurable or substantial impact to these species. We may see some benefits for some of them. Overall, we may impact the individuals, but we're not going to result in a downward population trend. Next slide. The next group of species are migratory birds and eagles. So overall, migratory birds are going to see a benefit from these treatments that we're proposing. First off, the treatments, they're going to be protective from potential impacts. At least those impacts will be minimized, because we're going to have things like breeding season restrictions for spotted owls. That's also going to help things like songbirds. Then these treatments are going to maintain and increase diversity of the habitats found in this project area. So that's going to be really good for birds, a variety of birds and other species. When it comes to eagles, we really don't anticipate any negative impacts to them. Largely, they could see, if they are present right now, we don't have observations of them in the project area, but if they are present, they may see an increase in forage opportunities, specifically like golden eagles. We have many design features that are developed specifically to protect and improve habitats for migratory birds, including leave islands, creating some openings, avoiding breeding season when possible for our treatments, and many, many more. So with all of that considered, we came to the conclusion for these species that, yes, we may impact them, likely will be localized and temporary impacts, and then, but no downward trends for these species, and again, long-term benefits. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, there we go. So just real quick to talk about the determinations. How they're kind of reached, I'll breathe as fast as I can.
Danny, this is Lucy.
We really looked at a whole bunch of things to all coming together to decide how it might impact the species. Yes, you there? Okay, you there?
Yeah, you were just breaking up, so I just wanted to let you know we missed a few words back there, but I think you're good to go now.
Okay, so I turned off my video. I apologize for that. Sometimes my internet doesn't like when I sway, if that's good.
Yeah, there you go. Good. We'll make do with that. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, and I'm almost done with my presentation, so hopefully we'll get through it pretty quick. Okay, so yes, we looked at the proposed treatments to, and all these things combined to come to our determinations for all these species. The main things we looked at is the relatively low impacts of the type of treatments we're proposing. We looked at that this is going to be conditions-based, site-specific, so we're not going to be doing these treatments across the whole landscape, and they're going to be just what each site-specific area needs. The desired conditions include diversity, and that's really important for all of our species. And we combine all that with design features and best management practices that will help protect and improve the species. Again, those design features, you can read about them in the draft EA. They're in the appendices. Those in the BMPs, the best management practices, those are integrated as part of the proposed action. Again, they minimize potential negative impacts, but also increase the potential for positive impacts. So I listed some examples there, for, a couple real quick, or like maintaining large snags and down logs. You can see the little squirrel sticking its head out of the tree there. Snags are important for those, species like that. Watching out to try and prevent weed spread. There's a picture of a weed there in the middle. And then just being, not harassing wildlife in general, such as like our friends snakes down there, so they can keep doing their job. So anyways, what overall we're going to have short-term impacts, maybe some displacement temporarily and localized. But really the one thing that is really going to help these species out is those long-term benefits, which includes diversity, reduced risk of large, high severity wildfires, which could potentially render their habitats unsuitable. So next slide. And this is my last slide. So a quick note on surveys and implementation. Part of what we also consider is that we're not, like other people mentioned, we're not doing treatments all at once. We're going to break this up into numerous treatments divided over the landscape and over many years. And so that helps the species. They can, if there's a slight disturbance to them, they can move to a neighboring area and still be able to do the stuff that they need to do for their life history. We'll continue to do surveys for MSO, for spot owls, for no-go, which is northern goshawk. Those will be a phased approach as we look for those species prior to each of these treatments in each of these units. Then from those observations, we'll determine what type of protections they may need or what kind of treatments may be necessary. Then we're going to implement, and that's where it's, we'll have considerations for multiple species, multiple habitats, use all the design features as applicable, and they're going to protect and improve the habitats and achieve the diversity and the desired conditions for numerous species of wildlife and plants that utilize the project area. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Danny, so much. I know, folks, this is a lot of information in a short period of time. It's like a taster kind of for the EA itself, and very appreciative of all the presenters. So Micah, great. Take it away, watersheds and hydrology and riparian resources.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Micah Kiso. I'm the Soil and Watershed Program Manager in the forest and also the Burned Area Emergency Response Coordinator. I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of sections 3.6, watersheds and hydrology, and section 3.7, riparian resources. Next slide, please. So 3 watershed resources were analyzed, and those included soil productivity, flow regime, and water quality. The soil productivity analysis utilized vegetative ground cover as a key indicator, and vegetative ground cover promotes infiltration, slows the flow of water, protects soil from erosion, reduces that sediment pollution, and it's important to soil regeneration, soil protection, and soil productivity. The flow regime was assessed by analyzing stream flows and flooding, and water quality was analyzed by looking at impacts from erosion, sedimentation, stream temperature, and water chemistry. Next slide, please. So the implementation of the proposed action does have the potential to result in short and long-term adverse impacts to watershed resources. Again, those are soil productivity, water quality, and flow regimes. But these impacts are expected to be minimal and short term. And this is because a number of reasons, and I'll touch on just a few here. So as Danny mentioned, in wildlife, as in watershed, there are numerous project design criteria, BMPs, and mitigation measures. I'd point you to Appendix C to read more about those. The purposes of each are stated there as well. Design features are intended to protect soil from erosion, protect riparian vegetation, and maintain that water quality and soil productivity. Another reason why impacts are expected to be minimal and short term deals with soil compaction. And although soil compaction can last for a very long time, up to 50 years in some cases, it is repaired by a frequent freeze-thaw cycle. And freeze-thaw commonly occurs many times throughout the winter within the middle and lower elevations of the project area. Also, heavy equipment would not operate on gradients steeper than 40%. This means much of the project area would be treated by hand, diminishing those widespread impacts to soil productivity. So continuing on with why impacts are expected to be minimal and short term, prescribed fire is intended to be of low to moderate severity. And soil erosion and sedimentation would be diminished by a low severity prescribed fire as compared with high severity wildfire. Also, the potential water quality effects to stream nutrients are significantly less in terms of concentration and duration by prescribed fire than by high severity wildfire. And finally, the last point, Most broadcast burns that low to moderate severity again promote the rapid establishment of that vegetative ground cover. And again, that establishment of vegetative ground cover is a significant control on the recovery of water quality to those pretreatment conditions. So really the key to mitigating adverse effects to watershed resources is to implement design criteria and best management practices that were designed specifically for project activities. And again, I'll point you to Appendix C for those. I think it's also important to note that the watershed analysis did compare project actions to high severity wildfire. But even in the absence of high severity wildfire, the majority of watersheds within the project area are currently functioning at risk due to existing upland riparian conditions. Next slide, please. So as Sandy touched on in her talk, a strategy has been developed to avoid cumulative watershed effects from project activities, and this can be found in Appendix F. And here the intent is to monitor undesirable moderate and high severity burn areas. It's important to note that not all moderate or high burn severity is undesirable. Really, it has to do with the amount, location, the connectivity of burn severity. That would all be important to determine if those undesirable conditions exist. So if those conditions were thought to occur, then the strategy would continue to identify if evidence exists of impacts to water quality, soil productivity, or ground cover regeneration. And this strategy would help to avoid cumulative watershed impacts by informing future project implementation. And next slide, please. And just a slide to touch on riparian analysis. So the proposed action includes up to 680 acres of riparian restoration. And this includes conifer and non-native invasive species removal and native tree planting and fencing. Riparian indicators analyzed for soil state diversity, riparian woody regeneration, coarse woody debris, exotic woody species cover, functional root diversity, flood regime, fire regime, and connectivity. So the riparian analysis concluded that these indicators would likely have no effects or actually beneficial effects from project actions. The proposed treatments would address that conifer encroachment and excessive vegetation density in riparian areas, really reducing that risk of high severity fire and the potential encroachment of non-native vegetation within the riparian habitat. The treatments would also reduce the overabundance of those late seral conditions, restoring ecological integrity of the riparian habitat. And so, very brief overview. I encourage you to read through the EA and more importantly, those appendices as well with the design criteria as well. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Micah. Thank you so much. I want to encourage people to put questions in the chat. We've got a few in line here, but want to be sure that we get as many questions answered as possible. So go ahead and put them in as they occur to you. And Lynn, please introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Lynn Bjorklund, and I am the recreation team lead for the Espanola Coyote District Zone. And I'm going to cover recreation and scenery in this briefing, since they are connected, and also because our scenery specialist wasn't available this evening. So most of our public utilizes the forest for recreation, and of course, scenery is a big part of that experience. The project area is the scenic backdrop to the city of Santa Fe and surrounding communities. Residents and visitors truly value the area as a personal, spiritual, and recreational landscape. And the best word to summarize the impacts to recreation and visual quality would be subtle. There really isn't a vantage point in the project area itself where a user could really see a large-scale overview of all or even most of the treatments that would occur. From a distance, the changes might be noticed, but that would be subtle. Now, in the EA, there are some artistic impressions of the changes that you might see with before and after photos, and you can detect a little difference from afar, but there's really nothing dramatic where the casual observer would see a major noticeable change. So now you can see on this map that there are 8 recreational sites or facilities and 8 trailheads within the project area. So So it's right in the midst of the heart of recreation for Santa Fe. And the most common questions from a recreation and scenic perspective is, how is this going to affect my recreational use, access, and experience? What will I see during implementation, and what will I encounter? So keeping in mind that the overall goal of the proposed action is to prevent the type of catastrophic fires that occurred across the valley in the Los Alamos area during the Cerro Grande and Las Conchas fires, where the entire viewshed and almost every recreational trail around that community was taken out in a single afternoon. And 10 and 20 years later, reconstruction of some of these trails is still occurring. And the scenery and type of recreational experience in the Los Alamos area was most definitely and dramatically changed forever. So we're hoping that's not going to happen in Santa Fe, and that's what this is all about. And despite the long-term benefits of the proposed action in protecting the future of these areas, there may be some short-term negative effects to the visual quality of the recreation experience. For example, vegetation thinning would generate some stumps and slash. Fire lines might create linear visual features, and some may not like kind of the black burned appearance of the landscape immediately following prescribed burning. However, the project would be implemented incrementally, so changes to scenery would also be incremental, and there's design features in place to minimize short-term impacts. And a few examples are that fire lines would be constructed using existing features such as roads and trails, rocky cliffs, open areas, previous burns. And where possible, thinning and burning would seek to mimic natural patterns and openings, and specialists would be involved with those treatment designs, especially in these areas highly valued for their scenic quality, like the Windsor National Recreation Trail would come to mind. So next slide. Now, this slide shows the system trails, I guess we are on the next slide, okay, that are within the project area. In the North project area, most of these are accessed from the main road 476 to the ski hill or from the Tasuki Village area. And short term, the most intrusive treatments to recreation is going to be from prescribed burns and the resulting smoke. And when there are prescribed burns, selected areas and trails may be closed for short periods of time. Now, next slide. Now, this slide shows the abundance of alternate trails in the region that are within about a half-an-hour drive that could be used to avoid closed area or smoke during these times of implementation. And only about 4,000 acres at a time would ever be treated. And the design features avoid like high-use recreation days, such as holidays and weekends, as much as possible. And we try to balance that with favorable climate conditions to keep the smoke away from the town. So that can be tricky. Now, during thinning and riparian operations, users might notice some noise, see warning signs on trails or even trail guards in some locations. But generally, the use of trails is not going to be restricted. Normal recreation would generally occur pretty much totally unrestricted throughout implementation. Then, other than some noise and occasional smoke, users of the recreational facilities such as campgrounds and picnic areas would not be affected due to the buffer requirement around these areas. And the only access road that would be affected is that 1.5 miles on the south side of the project, Forest Road 79 near Arroyo Hondo, and that's going to be closed to the public during implementation, which would require all the users to park at the actual trailhead rather than continue driving up this really rough road, which many prefer to hike anyway. Next slide. Now, this is a picture of the Viejo Trail that was consumed with a high intensity fire on that north end of the project area during last year's Medio fire. It is a good example of what Actually, that isn't it. The previous slide is the medio fire, I think. Whoops, is it the next slide? They may have gotten out of order a little bit. There it is. That's the Viejo Trail that was consumed during last year's medio fire. And being a good example of what we want to avoid. After the rains, the erosion, and all those trees falling over, this section of trail, it's been completely erased. If you went there, you just, it's not there anymore. The scenery, recreation experience, and access has been most definitely and dramatically affected here. Now that slide, which might be the one before, is a picture of a good prescribed burn where most of the trees survive and the ground debris is cleaned up to provide a more open, diverse, and resilient forest. These changes would likely be perceived by most as an improved aesthetic change. A healthier and more open forest would also offer more dispersed recreation opportunities like hunting, hiking, and wildlife viewing. And that's my summary of recreation and scenery. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lynn, so much. And thank you to all the presenters. That was a big ask to condense so much material into these short sound bites. And I do have a couple here. I've got a question, I think it would be for Gennaro. We've seen bark beetles and other insects take their toll on our forests. Will this project help or hurt the forest on that front? Yeah, something a lot of us are worried about, the return of the bark beetle. Gennaro?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, great question. So as I mentioned in the PowerPoint, we did look at the impacts on forest health, which is kind of a generic term for not just bark beetles, but all, forest insect, disease and pests. So that could include things like mistletoe or other disturbance agents like the Janet's looper that we experienced a few years ago up there in the ski basin. So in general, with bark beetles, their ecology is oriented towards they feed in the phloem of trees, so they prefer larger diameter trees, and they prefer a lot of them. And what I mean by that, they prefer dense stands with large diameter trees. And so what we anticipate from the small diameter thinning is that we'd be giving more room and less stress on the larger overstory. And so hopefully it would have a positive impact. But these are stochastic events that are mainly drought driven and stand conditions. So we can't control drought, but we can affect the conditions of the forest. So hopefully that helps.
Great, great. Thank you so much.
Good question. And yeah, please look at that section of the EA. We did address that question about forest health.
Great. I think this one would go to Josh. And it's a big one. How would the proposed treatments contribute or help or impact whatever global climate change? So the connection between these treatments and climate change.
Hey, hopefully you can see me. Sorry, I turned the light on behind me.
No, I know. I didn't mean to. I'm taking you guys by surprise. I know. That's fine. You look good.
All right, I just don't want to blind anyone. Bouncing off my head. So kind of repeating back, how would the proposed treatment affect global climate change? Is that
right? Either contribute to it or help ameliorate it or whatever.
Right. I think at the scale we're talking at, it's probably insignificant in the broader scheme. But I think specifically when we look at the treatment, and this is related to, what Gennaro talked about, we know that these forests play a really important role in carbon balance and carbon cycling. And one of the most important things we can do globally is to have forest is forest. And when you look at, some of the substantial changes that have occurred, post Los Conchas, you have a very different type of ecology over there than what was before. And so keeping these as forests as we kind of recognize them is one of the most important things we can do broadly in terms of balancing that carbon cycle. But we also know that over time, these frequent fire forests, especially the ponderosa pine and dry mixed conifer, with all the fire exclusion that Ryan talked about in his assessment, we've had a significant increase in terms of the density of these stands that have put them at much greater risk to wildfire. And what we know when high severity fires do come through research is that those places become a carbon source for decades afterwards. And one of the most effective things that we can do, and what the analysis shows and what research has shown, is that by having treatment and getting fire back into these systems, they will be much more resilient and resistant to some of those impacts, climate change, insect and disease, the effects of climate change, and over time, they will be a significantly greater source of carbon storage than what would occur post-wildfire. So, I think that, any of these treatments by themselves are probably insignificant, but, to this landscape in particular, I think that the most notable things are, keeping this as a forest and making it more resilient to drought, insects and disease, forest health, and the effects of climate change. I think the proposed treatments, would have a significant effect in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Good, interesting. Thank you, Josh, very much. So Danny, get ready. I think I've got one to spring on you here. How would the treatments that are in the EA impact wildlife connectivity corridors? So we know wildlife need those corridors to move around, to migrate. What would these treatments have negative impacts on that or positive impacts on that?
Okay, I'm gonna try to do my video again. Let me know if it's choppy or anything.
Okay, I will. I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so with connectivity corridors for wildlife, this is a pretty big landscape here, and so definitely we get wildlife moving to and from. We really don't have a good handle on where exactly those are currently. It's not fully known, but we do know there's some areas, especially in the southern part of the project, where mule deer use and go, to this project area, maybe south of the interstate. And so what we're going to do is we have a project design incorporated into this project, a design feature. So that way, as we're doing each one of these units, we can take a moment and consider, are we in an area that we might have a corridor here? How can we protect those corridors and maybe even improve them? We have that opportunity to also work with our partners like Game and Fish to talk to them and say, hey, what do you guys know about species in this area? And let's work together to make sure we're managing those accordingly. And then with that, the design features that we have are going to maintain that connectivity for keeping habitat characteristics, in that mosaic manner. We may have an opportunity, I mentioned leaf islands, which are basically going to be an area where we either have no treatment or very light treatment, and basically keeping those areas largely intact and how the wildlife is currently using them. Well, we could consider, if we have an opportunity in some places, to strategically place those leaf islands so that maybe wildlife could kind of leapfrog from one to the other of those to get across the landscape to where they need to go. And also ways that we can implement our treatments, considering topography maybe to help promote those. So I think we'll have lots of opportunities to actually maintain and benefit those species in the area. So looking forward to that. Thank you. Great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danny. It certainly is on your screen, on your radar. That's great. So let's see, how about Micah And let me just encourage those of you on Facebook, put a question into the Facebook comment, and it will make its way over here. We've got time for a couple more. Here is one, Micah, for you. How would prescribed fires affect the vegetation in riparian areas? So that's kind of, those are especially delicate areas, I know, along stream banks. And what about prescribed burns? Is there a way to protect that vegetation?
Yeah, so I would point back to those design features.
And Micah, let me just ask that you kind of come close to the microphone, and sometimes your sound is going like in and out.
Sure. Let me know if it gets worse. Or if this is
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, you know, I point back to those design features, really intended to mitigate those impacts to the riparian areas. Some being prescribed fire, not.
Yeah, Micah, just, I'm sorry, speak up, you know, kind of just hold still, get close, and turn the volume on yourself up a bit.
Let me see if this works a little bit better. Is this better? Right up again?
I think so. Yes, I think so.
So again, those design features intended to mitigate impacts to the riparian areas. One being prescribed fire, not being ignited directly.
Actually, Micah, I'm really sorry. That's worse. So so go back.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what is going on then. Let me try turning my video off and seeing if that would help for some.
Okay, and just just keep your volume up. Just keep your voice out there. Just shout at us. Don't be shy.
Yeah. Okay. So again, design features. You know, an example would be prescribed fire not being ignited within those riparian corridors. Another one, placement of those slash piles outside of those riparian management zones. And also implementing prescribed fire treatments when the soil surface is generally more moist. I think another one also, if riparian areas were affected or deficient, riparian vegetation would be planted. And you know, I think going back to the analysis, effects to those riparian vegetation systems are expected to be minor and localized. And in some cases, it could be beneficial as fire can stimulate that regeneration of woody species. So hopefully that answers the question, and hopefully you heard it all.
Great, thank you, Micah. Yeah, I think we got most of it. Appreciate it. Let's see, I've got one for Lynn. And you may have answered this, but maybe just a little more detail, Lynn. How would the treatments impact public access for recreation in the project area? So I know you talked about the trails, but are there other impacts that would keep people from recreating?
No, there won't be any access that will be affected by the proposed action. There was just that one road in the Arroyo Hondo where you can't drive up quite as far, but as far as just access to trailheads and the trails themselves, that won't be restricted unless there's a prescribed burn going on. Like you went up Pacheco Canyon and they were doing firing off from there, that might be closed for a short period of time for public safety, but generally, really, the access won't be affected by the proposed action.
Good. So maybe, obviously, temporary emergencies you can't help, but for public safety, other
Right.
than that, yeah. Good, thanks. I've got one more for Gennaro. Is the project going to remove most of the old growth trees around Santa Fe? I know that's a big concern for people. So what's the impact going to be on old growth trees around Santa Fe?
Yeah, sure. So the proposed action has two components, which is, the prescribed fire component and then the thinning component. Excuse me. And the thinning treatments are essentially aimed at the reduction of fuels, which is setting up conditions to safely and effectively reintroduce low severity wildfire onto the landscape. So the treatments will be focused directly at small diameter trees. Also, per the forest plan, we have old growth standards, and we did analyze for our required set aside of acres for old growth. The other thing I would add on to that is the recovery nest roost habitat that Danny mentioned in his little briefing there. And the nest roost habitats, forested nest roost habitats for Mexican spotted owl, those are very good analogs to old growth characteristics, you know, large trees, denser old forest, and that's been modeled and mapped for the project area as well. So we've definitely taken that into consideration. And again, it's there in the document. So thanks.
Great, great. Thanks very much. One more, and then I think we will wrap it up. We've got a songbird lover, Danny. What are some proposed actions or design features that would protect songbird habitats or improve those habitats? Anything aimed particularly at them? That's for Danny. Danny, you're on mute. There you go.
Got to hit the right buttons.
Right.
Okay. Yes, for songbirds, yeah, that's something that we, you know, looked a lot at. Migratory birds, you know, trying to protect those species and improve their habitats where we can. And so, you know, one I mentioned was those leaf islands as a design feature worked out into the proposed action. That's going to you know, really give some songbirds that want more of a dense type setting an opportunity to use those areas. But then also the proposed actions we have where we're thinning and maybe opening up some areas. Those more open stands are really going to help, you know, with grasses and forbs. You know, more light gets to the understory. You see a really good flush after these type of treatments, including prescribed burning of wildflowers and grasses. And of course, that gives songbirds an opportunity to go in there and you know, eat the seeds, that sort of thing. And so that really increases the potential habitat for those species. And again, it keeps a variety of species, a diversity of species for multiple types of songbirds, depending on what they want. Another design feature we have that we incorporate into the project is maintaining at least 15% of our mast producing pinon and juniper, mast producing being the ones that are producing seed and berries. Those are very important to wildlife species, like, for example, our pinon jays. And so areas that we have pinon and juniper habitat, we're going to make sure that we're maintaining adequate amounts of that for pinon jays and other species that use that type of habitat to continue to have those food sources and also areas to nest in, that sort of thing. And there, I could go on and on about a lot of the other design features that we have that protect and improve those habitats, but I encourage you to go into the EA, the draft EA, and those design features and the appendices and really read through them, as there's quite a few more that are really aimed to protect these species and improve their habitats. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great.
And
yeah, that's great, Danny. Yeah, makes me want to open that document right up. Appreciate it. So we are drawing to a close here. I wanted to just read one comment from Facebook. This person says we own an inholding just over the county line in San Miguel. I am totally in favor of any project. We have spent the past 10 years doing manual thinning, and the health of our forest and the wildlife have improved tenfold with the work that we have done. And one late question coming in, will traditional use communities be able to collect the fuel wood from the thinned project areas to use as firewood to heat their homes? Excellent question, relevant to so many people in this area. I'm not sure who might answer that. Maybe Steve, would you be the one to field that question and maybe take us into a closing?
Sure, I can do both. Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question regarding firewood collection. So So yes, wherever there's an opportunity to harvest any of the slash or the debris that we create from the treatments, we will open that up under our permit system to allow folks to go and collect or harvest whatever firewood where there may be an opportunity. But keep in mind that generally speaking, for the project area, the country or the topography is very difficult to get into. So there may not be a whole lot of opportunities for firewood collection, but wherever there is, where we can get to it, we will open it up for firewood collection. So yes, we will try our best to do that.
So, great. With that, I think we will draw the meeting to a close, 1 minute past 7:30. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it very much. Bye-bye.